Welcome to the Environmental Health Analysis Curriculum and Experience, better known as ENHANCE. Here, you will enhance your knowledge about environmental health sciences, quantitative and statistical skills, and data analysis techniques. In this first 5-part module, we have an environmental health sciences crash course for you where you will learn the basics about environmental health sciences. And I am Miss Raz, here to guide you through our journey of enhancement. So without further ado, let's get into this. First and foremost, you might be asking yourself, what is environmental health? And if you're not, then this is a good time for our very first Ask Yourself. Throughout this video series, there will be moments where I will prompt you to ask yourself a question. I encourage you to pause the video and take a moment to reflect and come up with your own answers. And feel free to share those answers. Now, back to the question. What is environmental health? What do you think it means? Maybe it's like about public health, like people and medicine. Or maybe it's the science of the environment, like ecology and plants. Or maybe it's toxic waste from power plants. Well, here's one definition. Environmental health is the field of public health that addresses physical, chemical, biological, social, and psychosocial factors in the environment. It aims both to control and prevent environmental hazards and to promote health and well-being through environmental strategies. Whew, that's a mouthful. Translation: environmental health is the study of all the things around you that might have a negative impact on your health. And it tries to stop those things from negatively impacting your health. That can include things like people, plants, and power plants. Anything that could affect your health. Many of us think of health as something that happens only within our bodies, but our health is very much affected by our environment. Before we begin, take a moment and look around your environment. What do you see? Is it overly bright or dim? Can you see any nature, or are you surrounded by buildings? Are there any pests crawling around? How about what do you hear? Are you near a busy street or a highway? Is it overly noisy? Maybe you can hear birds and other wildlife. Or maybe all you can hear is the hum of an air conditioner. What about smell? What do you smell? Is the air fresh, or is it kind of stale? Is there smoke, smog, old dirty carpets, freshly painted walls? And how about you? What do you feel? Is it cold, hot, humid? Has a mosquito recently feasted on you, causing you to itch? Are you hungry or thirsty? If so, can you easily access clean food and water? And what about your mental and social health? Are you feeling stressed or tired? Do you have someone you can call for support? These are all good questions to ask yourself periodically to check in on your own environmental health setting. However, there is much more to the environment than what you can perceive. Though environmental health sciences as a formal discipline has only been around for the last few decades, environmental health has been a thing for millennia. Let's go back to ancient Rome. The Romans and other ancient peoples realized they shouldn't be doing their due in or near their water supply. They recognized the effects of diseases like cholera, that nasty infection of the intestines caused by a bacteria, Vibrio cholerae, that causes severe diarrhea and vomiting, which leads to dehydration, which leads to death. Recognizing this, they created one of the first sanitation systems, which they actually got from the Etruscans as early as 500 BC, though they really hit their stride at the turn of the millennium. So they had a system of latrines where people would sit in long rows above a large trench, do their business, and water magically flushed away all the human waste. Though despite this innovation, disease was still a thing, and they did sometimes dump their due out the windows into the streets. Romans. But not bad overall for 2,000 years ago. Their real claim to environmental health fame was their aqueducts. Basically, they created a way to supply clean, or at least cleaner, water to the cities for things like drinking, bathing, and as noted, washing away waste. Though providing clean water was a thing 2,000 years ago, we take for granted that we can just turn on a faucet and be instantly provided with clean drinking water. This is not a given throughout the world, even to this day. Even in America, as we've seen in Flint, Michigan in recent years with lead contamination, which has a range of deleterious health effects like brain damage. So let's take a moment of gratitude to appreciate clean drinking water. Go drink some water. Hydrate. Another historic example of environmental health is how people learn to properly prepare or entirely avoid certain foods altogether. The Torah, which is the holy book for Jewish people, contains passages that dictate how certain foods should be handled and prohibit the consumption of pork. The Quran, which is a holy book for Muslims, also prohibits the consumption of pork. Though we can't be certain, some have speculated the reason for this could be that ancient people noticed they got sick more often after they consumed pork, possibly due to a nasty little parasite known as Trichinella spiralis, which can do some damage that would keep you at the ancient latrines for a while. Historical folks, even as far back as cave dwellers, knew to put their fire pits in well-ventilated areas. Fast forward a bit to when burning fuel indoors was regularly used for cooking, heating, and lighting, the carbon monoxide and soot created by these activities pose serious health hazards. Carbon monoxide can be lethal, as we unfortunately saw in the historic Texas freeze in 2021 when people tried using carbon monoxide-emitting camp stoves indoors. Let's take a moment to focus on the industrial era and the environmental health issues that emerged during this time. The industrial era is remembered as a time of great advancements in technology and manufacturing that led to unprecedented growth in the economy, higher incomes for workers, and urbanization. Unfortunately, from this rapid growth came cities that quickly became horribly overcrowded. Those of lower classes, which was the majority of people, typically lived in densely packed tenement housing with poor ventilation, poor drainage and sewer systems, and pest infestations which carried disease, just to name a few of the indoor environmental health hazards. Not to mention the massive increase in coal burning around this time, which of course was a massive source of air pollution outside. Take London in the mid-1800s. It was the most populated city in the world, as many flooded in with hopes of pursuing a better life with better job opportunities in the industrializing city. Unfortunately, it was also filthy. So filthy that the main water source of the city, the River Thames, was so polluted by untreated human waste and industrial discharge that over one particularly hot summer in 1858, the people named the pungent period the Great Stink. It was so bad that the curtains in Parliament were soaked with lime chloride to try to mask the odor to no avail. The Houses of Parliament were abandoned for 2 of the most pungent months. Around this time, a man named William Farr, who is widely regarded as a founder of medical statistics, started making connections between poor living conditions like those just mentioned and health. In 1849, approximately 15,000 people died due to our old friend, Vibrio cholerae. He, like many other of his time, believed the disease was due to miasma, from Greek, which literally means bad air. Though he was wrong, he was instrumental in gathering vital statistics which helped another fellow come to the correct conclusion. In 1854, once again, there was another cholera outbreak, which many believed was caused by miasma, but not Jon Snow. Unlike that other Jon Snow, this Jon Snow did know something. By talking to residents and mapping where most of the deaths occurred, Snow eventually zeroed in on the water supply, specifically one water pump that was located on Broad Street. Human waste, which was typically dumped in cesspools in front of houses or in the basements of buildings, leaked out of the poorly constructed pits and mixed with the well water below. Snow managed to convince the local council to disable the pump by removing the handle, which ended the outbreak. Snow was already hinting at a new idea to explain the route of transmission of disease. However, despite his research and success in thwarting another major cholera outbreak, it wasn't until Louis Pasteur's work in the 1860s that the scientific community began to accept and transition to the currently held germ theory. Let's all fast forward again to what we might consider modern time. In 1962, Rachel Carson challenged the multi-million-dollar industrial chemical industry when she released Silent Spring, a book widely regarded to have started the environmental movement. In it, she describes a picturesque rural spring scene. However, something is amiss. It's silent. There are no birds, there are no insects. A strange stillness caused by excessive and indiscriminate use of industrial chemicals like dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, or more pronounceable, DDT. DDT is an organochlorine pesticide. It worked well at controlling certain pesky insects. However, it also managed to kill off other unintended species. It also had the nasty little habit of accumulating in the tissues of animals, leading to mass species death. Another of DDT's cousins, DDD, was used to control a gnat. And no, this gnat did not bite humans or present any other particular threat other than being annoying to fishermen and resort goers around a lake. The initial treatment of the lake habitat was with 1 part DDD to 70 million parts of water. It worked for a while, but eventually needed to be repeated, but this time it was 1 part DDD to 50 million parts of water. They got rid of the gnat, but spoiler, there were unintended consequences. The first signs were seen in the western grebe, a type of waterfowl that suddenly started dying in mass. Initial investigations showed no signs of disease, but thankfully somebody had the thought to check the fatty tissue of the birds, where nasty things like the oily pesticides can be stored, and found DDD concentrations of 1,600 parts per million, Remember, the maximum applied to the water was 1 to 50 parts per million. What they failed to realize was that concentrations increase due to accumulation up the food chain. Plankton had about 5 parts per million. Plant-eating fish, 40 to 300 parts per million. Then carnivorous species with concentrations as high as 2,500 parts per million. These effects persisted even after this generation. Many aviary species failed to either produce or successfully hatch young. Those that did survive also carried concentrations of DDD as high as 1,000 parts per million, even months after the last application of DDD. These unintended consequences extended to humans as well. Groundwater and food contaminations have been linked to cancers and defects in humans too. You might be thinking, well, that's just the stuff sprayed outdoors. I'm safe inside. There are plenty of examples of environmental hazards within the home. Cleaning products, burning candles, off-gassing of toxic plastics, which is actually the source of that delicious new car smell we all love. And even personal care products like talc, found in baby powder. The FDA considers talc safe. However, it's where talc is mined that creates a dangerous problem because talc and asbestos are typically found and mined in the same area. Asbestos is a naturally occurring wonder fiber with dozens of applications. It was used as a strengthener and had the lovely feature of being naturally fire resistant. It was widely used for a variety of building materials like floor and ceiling tiles, paper products, heat-resistant fabrics, and insulation, just to name a few. See all those little fibers? When you inhale them, they get stuck in your lungs and your body goes crazy trying to attack the foreign intruders. This can lead to scarring of the tissues and increases the risk of lung cancer. The dangers of asbestos were suspected as early as the 1900s. A researcher began to notice there was a large number of young people dying from lung-related health issues in asbestos mining towns. Asbestosis, which describes long-term scarring and inflammation in the lungs caused by asbestos fibers, was first formally diagnosed in 1924. In 1930, a report to the British Parliament concluded long-term exposure to asbestos was irrefutably linked to asbestosis, which was then linked to mesothelioma, a particularly aggressive type of cancer which is now known to be caused by asbestos in more than 80% of cases. By the 1960s, the link between exposure to asbestos and negative health outcomes was obvious. However, the asbestos industry turned a blind eye and worked hard to keep the public from seeing it, but they could not hide the mounting number of diseases being found in asbestos workers. In 1967, the first victim of asbestos exposure successfully filed a personal injury claim. In the following years, the UK updated their asbestos regulations. Finally, in 1976, the Toxic Substance Control Act granted regulatory authority over commercial chemicals to the Environmental Protection Agency. In a court case in 1978, a South Carolina judge ruled asbestos companies made a conscious effort to suppress damning information on asbestos to avoid losses and lawsuits. In 1989, the EPA made efforts to phase out and ban asbestos in the US, but this was eventually overturned due to pressure from asbestos lobbyists. Sadly, the US is still one of the few developed nations that has not completely banned asbestos. So unfortunately, we can be exposed to noxious substances in and outside the home. And sadly, the list of egregious environmental health disasters goes on. The extensive mercury contamination and poisoning of Minamata, Japan, which was so widespread that a new disease, Minamata disease, was named after the area. This resulted in muscle weakness, loss of hearing, vision, and speech. In extreme cases, some went mad. The Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland is mad because hatters at the time used mercury in the trade. Some became paralyzed and others died. Some of the worst effects were observed in the children born with cerebral palsy during and even after the initial outbreak due to an accumulation of mercury in the food chain. The Bhopal chemical disaster in a fertilizer plant in India due to a gas leak which killed over 2,000 people initially, but an estimated 20,000 people in total, and exposed over 500,000 people to methyl isocyanate gas, a highly toxic and extremely hazardous material. DuPont Chemical, the ones that make that nice nonstick pan, they have been responsible for widespread water contamination in Ohio and West Virginia, which has been linked to certain cancers and other health issues. Mass lead contamination from paint, fuel, water, and soil in the US, which resulted in a slew of deleterious effects, one of the most poignant being damage to the brain and nervous system, especially in young and developing children. And of course, we can't forget about the recent lead poisoning from Flint, Michigan's water supply. Another emerging and vital issue is that of environmental justice. The majority of people affected by environmental health hazards are typically impoverished and/or underrepresented groups. It has long been known that race and ethnicity have been used as a reason to not offer someone a home loan, which resulted in people of color being restricted to live in certain areas, thereby stripping them of the opportunity to live where they want and accumulate wealth through home ownership. It is by no means a coincidence that a city would also zone these highly segregated neighborhoods to be for industrial use, thus placing undue exposure and burden on an already vulnerable population. Environmental justice seeks to provide equal protection for all communities against environmental hazards and provide access to clean air, water, green space, and other health-promoting assets while taking into account the sustainability of resources. This is another good moment to ask yourself, what other recent environmental health issues can you think of? Are there some things that you are already passionate about? Some of the more egregious examples might have upset you, but let this motivate you to want to know and do more. You just might be a budding environmental health science researcher yourself. In the rest of this environmental health sciences crash course, we will be taking a more in-depth look at some of the active research in the field. We'll hear from environmental health science researchers about their research, how they came into the field, and what keeps them going. We'll be going over actual research papers that, though at first glance may look intimidating, don't worry. We'll walk through them together to help you establish a starting foundation in environmental health sciences and hopefully enhance your experience with your own health and environment. I will see you there. Cheers.